That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Alright guys, before we start the video, I just owe y'all a massive thank you for all the support y'all been giving the videos lately. I mean, every like y'all leave, every comment you leave, it drastically helps the channel, and I could not be more appreciative. And because of that, because we've been seeing such great support as of late, I'm actually going to open up questions to not just Patreon members for the beginning of the season. I'm going to be answering everyone's start-sit questions through video format. So if you want your start-sit question answered for the first couple weeks of the NFL season, go down to the description of the video. You don't even have to join Patreon. It'll be completely free. Just join our fantasy football group chat, and from there you're going to see a start-sit tab where you can ask all your questions. I'm sure there'll be a ton of people there to give you their opinions, and at the same time I will be going down there and tabbing my favorite questions, the guys I think that are closest, and I will be making a video every single week based off of your own questions. That way we can get some real data points out here and not just hypotheticals. But for this video, I'm going to talk about my top 5 must-add players going into week 1 of the NFL season. Even if it is after week 1, a lot of these players are still going to apply for your going weeks early on in the NFL season. But let's start it off from the most owned player, and we're going to go down our list until we get to the deepest guy. And the first guy we are going to talk about is Desean Jackson. Now, Desean Jackson may have been drafted in your fantasy football league depending on when you held your fantasy football draft. He's available in about 45% of leagues on ESPN at this current moment. And I think the reason that we should go out there and aggressively pursue Desean Jackson is due to really every other offensive weapon around him just dropping like flies. I mean, we see Jalen Reagor, the Philadelphia Eagles round 1 wide receiver. I mean, he's going to be out for a couple weeks with a shoulder sprain. And we see Dallas Goedert, their number 2 tight end, but is a significant target contributor on this offense. I mean, he is dealing with a broken thumb. So yes, he's not going to miss any time, but he is going to be playing hurt. And I think that maybe we see a couple of his targets that would have gone his way be spread out through the other pass catchers on this offense. And at the same time, we actually see Miles Sanders dealing with a mild hamstring strain, which all reports say is he's good to go for week 1. But at the same time, this is a team that is playing Washington. Washington has a much better front 7 than they do with their secondary. So I expect Carson Wentz to try to attack this team downfield. And even though he is getting later on in his career, I mean, he has showed no signs of slowing down. I mean, he's a player that, yes, does get injured every single season. And that's a guy that you don't necessarily want to hold on your roster throughout the entire year. But if you can go out there, you can pick him up for free off of your waiver wire going into week 1 or 2. Get a couple starting weeks out of him. Maybe he can give you some free wide receiver 2 production. And then the second he gets injured, you just drop him. Or the second that Jalen Reagor comes back to this offense and Desean Jackson stops getting the targets, I mean, you can also just drop him for nothing. No harm, no foul. But now let's go to our second must-add player. And this is going to be a very similar thesis. This is Boston Scott. So Boston Scott, yes, he's an undersized backup running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. But what's important about Boston Scott is down the stretch in 2019, when the Eagles really had no offensive weapons to go to, even though Boston Scott was playing that RB2 position for them, he was still seeing significant targets. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but please tab over on the video and go look it up. It was kind of funny how many targets Boston Scott was getting out of the backfield while Miles Sanders was playing ahead of him and getting targets himself. So going into week 1 and 2, when we don't know for sure if Miles Sanders is going to be good for the first 2 weeks of the season in terms of the offensive volume that he can command, and also some players on this offense are going to have to get targeted. And with the downgrades of the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line due to injuries that we've seen in the training camp, maybe Carson Wentz can't hold on to the ball as long as usual. Maybe he actually has to dump the ball out of the backfield more often, and those targets will be going to Boston Scott early in the year. And so you can hold him with the RB3 floor for the first few weeks of the season due to the targets and receptions that he is going to get. And he does have that upside. Maybe Miles Sanders pulls that hamstring again, he re-aggravates it, and is out for a month or two. Then you have a starting running back for the Philadelphia Eagles on your hands, and he's owned in about 40% of leagues at the moment. So I think over half of y'all should be able to go out there and grab him. Obviously not in these super deep leagues he is going to be available, but maybe you can go out there and just check to see if he is. Now, our third player, Chris Thompson, a guy that is very similar to Boston Scott, where he's not going to carry the ball a ton. But the good thing about the offense that he plays in is, you don't really want those carries anyway. What you want is the targets out of the backfield, and that is what Chris Thompson is going to provide. Leonard Fournette is cut. We know that Leonard Fournette got a ton of targets out of that Jacksonville backfield last season, and we know that Fournette's not necessarily a great pass-catching running back where Chris Thompson is. But the main problem with Chris Thompson is he cannot stay healthy, so similar to Desean Jackson. If you can go out there, pick up Chris Thompson, he's available in about 61% of leagues right now, and you only are able to start him for the first 1 to 3 weeks, and then he pulls up with a high ankle sprain. It does not necessarily matter. You cut him after that, and then you got that free 1 to 3 weeks of production. Fantasy football is not necessarily a game where you play for total season points. What you do is you play for week-to-week production, and that's how we're going to use this waiver wire, and that's how we're going to get an advantage over our opponents. So Chris Thompson is the number 3 guy that you should go out there and pick up. He also has that chemistry already with Jay Gruden. He's following him from Washington. So maybe we see Chris Thompson be a guy that can go out there and get 5 to 6 receptions in week 1 and week 2. And if that happens and he can rack up 40 yards on those receptions, bam, if he gets a touchdown, he's an automatic RB2, and he has the floor of being an RB3 as long as he can stay healthy in that offense due to they have DJ Chark, they have Laviska Shenault, but Laviska Shenault is a rookie, and we know with the shortened offseason, we're not necessarily projecting these rookies to come out and make significant impacts right away. So I think Chris Thompson is a guy that can start hot. You can plug him into your starting lineup if need be. And once you see that he's either injured or not producing, no harm, no foul. Cut him from your team and go pick up your next favorite running back. Now, let's get to our last 2 guys. One of these has been all over Twitter lately, a ton of hype on him, and this is rookie Bryan Edwards. So if you are an extreme dynasty player, if you are an expert redraft player, you're kind of rolling your eyes at this list. You're saying, yeah, Mason, I know all of these guys. But the casual fantasy football player may not know of Bryan Edwards, who's coming out of South Carolina. He's going to the Las Vegas Raiders. He was selected in the 3rd round of the 2020 NFL Draft. And with Bryan Edwards, he's a guy that was a very efficient producer his freshman season at South Carolina, but then he kind of plateaued, did not necessarily get a ton better. So I was not really all over him this offseason like some people were. But we can't ignore the fact that Daryl Williams is going to IR. They just traded away Lynn Bowden, who may have been able to get some targets either out of the backfield or playing a hybrid role in that system. So it looks like targets are becoming available. Bryan Edwards kind of profiles to be a guy that should have a great chemistry with Derek Carr, who's known to throw a lot of balls around the line of scrimmage. Bryan Edwards ran a ton of screens in college, and this is one reason I did not necessarily like him a lot coming into the NFL draft, just because I didn't think he could necessarily run the routes that meant a lot for an NFL team. But at this point, when he's going to get the opportunity on this offense, you can't necessarily ignore him. But let's go to our last player. This is my favorite player to go out there and target. At the moment, he's available in about 80% of leagues. I think that after Thursday night with the Kansas City-Houston Texans game, that number is going to dwindle down to almost being available in no leagues, but Daryl Williams. So with Daryl Williams, we know that he was kind of being projected as the Kansas City Chiefs RB3 or RB4 earlier this offseason when they had Damian Williams, they had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and they actually brought in DeAndre Washington. And most people thought DeAndre Washington was ahead of Daryl Williams on the Kansas City Chiefs depth chart. But since then, we see that Daryl Williams has actually been running with the ones, and a lot of people didn't necessarily think this was major news just due to the fact that Daryl Williams was the only running back on that roster that had been with the team before outside of Darwin Thompson. But Darwin Thompson obviously did not get to touch the ball at all in his rookie season, so most people just kind of wrote him off. And now we're looking at a situation where they went out there and cut DeAndre Washington. So Daryl Williams is confidently this RB2 in the most prolific offense in the NFL behind a rookie running back that is not necessarily oversized. So if we see Daryl Williams get goal line work, if we see him kind of split the backfield with Clyde Edwards-Helaire early on in the season, he's another one of these guys that you can go out there, add to your fantasy team, be ahead of the crowd, go get him before he's everyone's top waiver wire target once they realize by watching that Thursday night game that Daryl Williams is going to have a significant role on this Kansas City Chiefs offense and he's going to score fantasy points. Now, that's all I got for y'all. Please, I'm going to list off the guys one last time. Daryl Williams, Desean Jackson, Chris Thompson, Boston Scott, and Bryan Edwards. If you have a couple extra roster spots, go out there, go cut a guy like Hunter Renfrow that does not necessarily have any upside. Go get these guys that you may only have on your roster for a couple weeks, but they are going to be able to provide you production, and that's something that's going to be extremely valuable in a game that we are just playing week to week and trying to outlast our opponents. But thanks, guys, and as always, have a great day.
That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.